All right, tonight we are down to Romans, the 5th chapter, and starting with verse 12. And you might say, well, I think that's what we were on last week, and it is. And we started last week's class the same way that we're going to start this week's class. That is by calling our attention to the fact that the Apostle Peter said that Paul wrote some things that are hard to be understood, and that the ignorant and the unsteadfast wrestle with these as they do the other scriptures. One of these passages is this passage we're in, chapter 5, verses 12 through 14, and especially in verse 13 that we'll be talking about tonight. And so then, we got a guy here that says, I sure wish I knew what this meant. So we got some advice for him, and that is this. Let's remember, your interpretation of things that are hard to be understood must be in harmony with things that are easy to be understood. In other words, when I get down to a passage here and I say, now this is very difficult, let me tell you now what I think it means. Now, if I tell you something that I think it means, and you're able to go to another passage and say, Lowell, this passage over here just as clear as a bell, and it contradicts that, then you know that I'm wrong. And so what we have to do is to take the passages that are easy to be understood, and then we use them to interpret the passages that are hard to be understood. So we'll try that really as we go through here. Now, in verses 1 through 11 of this chapter, we learned how Christ saved us not only by His death, but also by His life. We had all those beautiful words that are in there, all those wonderful things. Now then we come down to verse 12. Therefore. Now the reason I put this chart up is because as you look in verse 12, it says, therefore. That means what I'm getting ready to say is based on what I've just got through saying. You how that Christ has saved us by His death and His life. And so he's saying, therefore, now then, I'm going to go ahead and explain how Christ is our Savior. So, as we start in these verses here, we're going to see it illustrates how one man, Christ, can be saved, or can save us, by comparing how one man, Adam, can condemn us. Now, this section is a comparison. In other words, how is it that Christ, one individual, how is it that he can save the whole world? Paul said, I'm going to compare it with Adam. And we're going to see how it is that Adam, one man, was able to condemn the whole world. And so he's going to compare then Christ with Adam. And it's going to be a rather unusual comparison in here because he's going to show that as Adam had power to be able to introduce sin into the world and the whole world become lost, so Christ has the power to save us, except Christ's power is much greater. Whatever Adam did, Christ is going to do it to a much greater degree. Now that's what this passage right here is all about. So let's start out now, and we'll try to look at it without skipping through, try to look at it in somewhat of a detail. And sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death passed unto all men, for that all sin. Now, we want to talk about death through sin. So let's take a look at it here, and as you go back to find out how this happened in Genesis 2, and Jehovah God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And Jehovah God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat. For in the day thou dost eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. So now, you're going to die if on the day that you eat of good and knowledge. Then, it says again, and the woman said unto the serpent, of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now we're going to be talking about sin. We're going to be talking about how Adam brought death into the world. And in order to understand this, we got to understand that here it is, God has made it plain back in Genesis that death is going to be dependent upon man eating of that tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. If you do, the day you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. So now we raise the question, what kind of death is he talking about? Is it physical death? Is it spiritual death? Or is it both? What death is he going to be talking about? Now, I understand it to be both. However, let's make it clear now in here that in this particular passage, he's going to be talking about spiritual death. He's going to be talking about the death that condemns you. Now, physical death doesn't condemn you. Little babies die physical death, they're not condemned. But spiritual death, and spiritual death is a separation from God. Physical death is where you separate from your body. Now, both of these things took place in the Garden of Eden. First of all, when is it that it says that you're going to die? When you eat of that, how long will it take before you die? The day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Adam ate. How long did Adam live? Another 800 years, I suppose, before he died physically. But he did die that day. He died spiritually. Now, there was something else that happened that caused a physical death. So let's look at this now, because both of these took place back there in this particular chapter. So what caused Adam to die physically? Now, in Genesis 2, verse 17, and then again in chapter 3, verse 3, and then in chapter 3, verse 22, let's see what God said. Now, Adam has sinned, and Jehovah God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil. Now, read carefully. Lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Therefore Jehovah God sent forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim, and the flame of a sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. So now, stop and ask this. The day you eat thereof, you're going to die. We're severed from God at that time when they committed that sin. But now, God says we have a problem. This problem is they now are sinners. They have committed sin. They're severed from God. But now, if they go over and eat of this other tree, which is the tree of life, they will be able to live forever. And so we're going to have these sinners living forever. So we don't want them living forever. So I'm going to ask you, what was God's solution? How did he keep man from living forever? Man had the capability in the Garden of Eden. Had he not eaten of that tree, he wouldn't have sinned. Had he gone over to eat of the tree of life, he would have lived forever. By the way, probably forget to bring this up again, but as you go all the way through the Bible, and you get down to the 21st and 22nd chapters of Revelation, where it tells you about heaven, and how that when we get there, what is it that's going to be there? The tree of life, of which we eat and we will never die. That tree of life was taken away from Adam. That's what caused Adam and Eve to not be able to live forever. Now, we say, well then, it says, and so death passed unto all men, for that all sinned. So everybody sinned. So now how did we all sin when Adam sinned? See, how did we sin? Now, we have to wrestle with that problem. Now this is one of the passages that it's hard to be understood if this is the only thing that you had in all the Bible, and somebody said, what did we do when Adam sinned? Well, we sinned ourselves when he sinned there. Now, if that contradicts other passages, we know then that it must mean something else. Of what does it mean? So we say, what does it mean? How did we all sin and die? Well, first of all, when we sinned, when Adam sinned, and we sinned that time, we were deprived from the tree of life. Now, I want us to get that fixed in our mind. How many of you have ever eaten of the tree of life? We were deprived of the tree of life. Now, when Adam sinned, then you go to his children, the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, the next 10,000 times, as long as the world lasts, 100,000 generations. How many generations will be deprived of that tree of life? Every generation. So what's going to happen to every individual? The day that you're born into this world, what do you know is going to happen to you? You are going to die. You don't have the tree of life to eat from, and so you are going to die. Now, Adam was the head of the whole race, and when he sinned, it was Adam's fault. Adam deprived you and me of that tree of life. Now, he not only did that, but Adam introduced sin into the world. He introduced sin in. As the head of the human race, he brought in sin. Let's look at it in this way. Abraham, I'm going to illustrate. This is just an illustration, it's a comparison. Begat Jacob, Jacob begat Levi, Levi begat the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, and on down the line. Now, you might be interested in this. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 7 and in verse 4. And let's read an interesting thing over here. We'll see the priesthood of Levi. Now we start in verse 4. Now consider how great this man was. Now he's talking about who? Can you scan the context? Tell me who he's talking about? Who's the great man? Melchizedek. Now consider how great Melchizedek was. That's all he's going to tell you. Look how great he was. Now Melchizedek, was he a Jew or a Gentile? He lived the same time Abraham lived. And he wasn't a Jew, was he? He wasn't an Israelite. He wasn't an offspring of Abraham. They lived at the same time. He was so great, that Gentile, Melchizedek, he was so great that Abraham paid tithes to him. That's what he's telling us in here. Now, Melchizedek, you remember he was a king and a priest? See, he was a king and a priest of Salem. Now, Abraham paid tithes. Now look in verse 4. Now consider how great this man was, unto Abraham, unto whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth out of the chief spoils. And they indeed of the sons of Levi that received the priest office have commanded to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is of their brethren, through these have come out of the loins of Abraham. Now, stop. Levi commanded all the Jews to pay tithes to the Levitical priest, didn't he? To bring it in to the Levitical priest. So all the Jews were to bring tithes into the Levitical priest. But who did Abraham pay tithes to? Melchizedek. Now get ready, because he's getting ready to say that Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek. So it said in verse 6, but he whose genealogy is not counted from them that have tithes of Abraham, that is Melchizedek, and hath blessed him that hath the promises, but without any dispute the less is blessed of the better, that is Melchizedek was better than Abraham, and here men that die receive tithes, but there one of whom it is witnessed that he lived, and so to say, through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, that's from the Jews, even Levi, who received tithes, hath paid tithes, that's to Melchizedek, for he was yet in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek. And you say, wait a minute, he wasn't even born. That's the Bible's point. Levi wasn't even born. But what you have is you have the priesthood of Melchizedek, and you have the priesthood of Levi, the Levitical priesthood, which is of the Jewish law. Now, he's showing which one is greater. Christ is going to be like Melchizedek. And he's going to be showing that that's better than the Levitical, because even Levi paid tithes. Levi, I want to make that impression. The first high priest, see, in there, the first, how will I put it? He wouldn't be the first high priest. Who was first high priest? Aaron. Where'd Aaron come from? What tribe? The tribe of Levi. See? Now the granddaddy of that tribe, the father of that tribe, the number one man of the Levitical tribe, Levi, he paid tithes to Melchizedek, and he wasn't even born. So how did he do it? He was still in the loins of Abraham. In other words, when Abraham paid Melchizedek, Levi was going to be born out of that genealogy, and it's the same as Levi paying tithes to Melchizedek. Now, all I'm getting at is, I want you to see that I'm not just making up a theory. Here it is, you have the head of the Hebrew nation, Abraham. The head of the Hebrew nation, Abraham, does something. He pays tithes to Melchizedek. When you get down to Levi, what does the Bible say about Levi, who wasn't even born at that time? He paid tithes to Melchizedek. Do you see when the head of a nation or a tribe, the representative head does something, it affects everybody? Let me illustrate it by another way. President Bush. President Bush declared war on Iraq. How many of you, by the way, did he call and ask? And you gave him advice and you said, yes, I think you should do that. I didn't get my call. Who declared war on Iraq? President Bush. President Bush. Are you at war with Iraq? Now, you might even be opposed to the war, but you're at war with Iraq. You're at war with Iraq. Who's paying for the war in Iraq? You are. You may cry on April the 15th when you pay that taxes. Think about me, I'll be crying all day long. I don't want to pay taxes, but you've got to pay. You've got to pay. Now, as you go down through, here it is. I've got us up there at the first. The next generation, 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 right on down the line is represented in this particular case. When will it be? Let's suppose everything turns out the way it's supposed to. Government, everything just turns out beautifully. There's freedom over there, and it spills into the eastern countries and Iran and so forth. Finally, they turn democratic. Everybody is at peace and harmony in the Mideast for the first time since Adam, and everything is just great over there. Who caused it? Do you think that we'd say, well, America did that? Well, yeah, America did it. But how did we do it? Did it through Bush. By the way, is Bush fighting the war? No. No, the Americans are fighting the war. Is Bush paying for the war? No, we're paying for the war. So now I want to ask you, whose war is it? Tell me about the war in Iraq. Is it the Americans' war, or is it just Bush's war? See, it's all of us, isn't it? We're at war. See, we're at war. He's the one that caused the war. You will not be held responsible for causing the war, but you will either suffer the consequences in a bad way or in a good way. See? You're going to do it in a bad way or in a good way. So we could say, through President Bush, all Americans are at war. Through Abraham, all Levites paid tithes to Melchizedek. Through Adam, all people sinned. Because Adam introduced sin in, just like war was introduced into us, and everybody becomes a part of it that's here. So I think that we can see that through this representative head is how we all sinned. It's the same way we all got into the war. See, we all got into the war by our representative head in here. Now, the tree of life, due to Adam, race, Adam's sin, and we were all removed from the tree of life. So we're all going to die. When Adam introduced death into the world, it affects you just as well as it affects him. We all sin in that respect. Now then, I want us to look at what this section is about, and the farther we go, I think the more we can see really what it's talking about. This section we're studying is talking about the power of one man. That's all that it's talking about, is the power of one man. Before I go ahead, remember what we said the first 11 verses were about? What was the first 11 verses about? What was chapter 4 about? And what was chapter 3 about? It was about how all people had sinned and Christ came and paid for our sins. One man, Christ. Now, the power of one man. That's what this section is going. Just like one man brought sin into the whole world, so one man took sin away from the whole world. That's what the whole section is going to be about that's in here. Now, whatever Adam did, Christ undid. I doubt if you'll find that word in a dictionary, but that's a good word. Whatever Adam did when he sinned, Christ undid when he died on the cross. Now, I want you to keep that in mind. We haven't proved it yet, but as we go through, let's see if it doesn't become just as clear as a bell. That's the thing that he's talking about. The whole thing he's talking about is Adam, one man, was powerful enough to introduce sin into the world, and as a result, everybody in the world died. So it is one man, Christ, introduced his blood into the world and provided a cure for every person in the world. You might look at Adam's sin in this way. How many people would it take, let's suppose in some faraway place in Africa, we always go to Africa, don't we? Some faraway place nobody's ever heard of, and there is a human being that's there, and somehow or another he gets involved with the animals and all of this, and he contacts a deadly germ. A deadly germ. And it will either kill you or it's going to make you deathly sick. 10 times what this flu has been about. One man got it. Could that go through the whole world? Could we say through one man, the whole world has become deadly sick? See? Yeah, everybody sees that. Everybody sees it could be. So what do we need? If through one man there is a deadly disease which makes you horribly sick and will kill you, what's the problem? What does the human race need? They need a man to step forth to do what? Provide the cure. Isn't that it? As one man can provide the disease, somebody can step forward and discover the medicine that will cure the disease. And so, just like the one man introduced death or this horrible disease, and everybody in the world is going to catch it because it's deadly contagious, so another man could find the cure and introduce it into the world. And so that's what we're going to have with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is going to introduce the cure, and the cure is going to be much more powerful than the sin. Now, if Adam, I want you to think about this, if Adam made without disobedience, then Christ made everyone a sinner, or a saint, without obedience. Chew on that. It would be worth our time to spend the rest of the class period just on that one chart. Because this is what you're going to see is talking about. Whatever Adam did, Christ undid. There's no question about that. That's going to be the purpose of this whole section. It's going to be clear. Now, the majority of people will read this passage and say, well, Adam made us all sinners even though we didn't sin. Well, let's suppose he did. You're right. He made us sinners, so everybody is a sinner because of Adam. Now, when Paul comes along and says that whatever Adam did, Christ undid, what does that mean then? See? That means everybody who became a sinner without it disobeying is now going to become a saint without doing anything. If Adam made you a sinner without you doing anything, Christ is going to save your soul and make you a saint without you doing anything. You think that might contradict some scriptures? You say, well, that's pretty simple. It's in there. Now, whatever Adam did. Now, if babies inherit Adam's sin, so they're all sinners, then Christ undid inherited sin so that nobody is a sinner. Now, last week we talked about, you remember the total depravity and inherited sin? If all babies inherit Adam's sin, then when Christ died on the cross and he undid what Adam did, what does that mean about all babies since Christ died? They're all saved now, see? Turn the thing just around. So we need to see it in this way, yeah.
I read verse 12, and it doesn't say that sin spread to all men. It says death spread.
Yeah.
So through Adam, death spread to all men. But it doesn't say that Adam's sins spread.
Well, it says because all sinned.
Well, does it, I don't speak Greek. Does it mean because all sinned or because all have sinned?
No, I think it means because all sinned. Yeah. I'd have to check it out before I could say it dogmatically, but I think it says all sin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I'll check it and make sure here. Now, I'm laying groundwork before we get into the text so you can see this. So now then, the truth is this. Adam introduced sin into the world. Men, having been in a world where the sin is introduced, we have sinned. By the way, if we take this person in Africa who introduces this deadly flu into the world, how many people are going to catch it? Well, it's so strong that it takes control of every human being. It takes control of every human. Everybody catches it. See? Now, when sin was introduced into the world, this is kind of a touchy point. Does every human being have to sin? since sin was introduced into the world? Let me ask it again. Since sin was introduced in the world, how many people have sinned? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And John says, if you say you haven't sinned, what does he say about you? You're a liar. So you become a sinner there. Now, how do we know that you don't have to sin? How do we know flesh and blood doesn't have to sin? Christ. Christ came and he didn't sin. He's the only one. Sin is so powerful that every human being made of flesh and blood has succumbed to that selfish desire, and we have sinned. And so, Adam introduced it. We caught the disease. We've all sinned. Now, Christ introduced a cure into the world for sin, and if we'll take advantage of that cure, then we can be saved. Now, the Bible teaching about inherited sin. Let's look at it here first of all. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Doeth sin, doeth also lawlessness. And sin is lawlessness. Now, there's no question about what sin is lawlessness. If you say, what's the flu? Well, the flu is a virus. You can describe it. What is sin? Sin is not a condition. It's not something in your DNA. Sin is lawlessness. What's lawlessness? What would lawless be? Something against the law. Something that is opposed to the law. It's breaking the law. So everyone that doeth sin doeth also the breaking of the law. And sin is breaking of the law. So for you to become a sinner, what does that verse say? It is. You're going to break the law. Now, let's look at some little babies that hadn't been born yet. And not only so, but Rebekah also having conceived by one, even by our father Isaac. For the children not being yet born, neither having done anything good or bad. Now, what had those children done in the womb, in Rebekah's womb? Had they broken the law? Had they done anything bad? No. They hadn't, not in the womb, see, in here. So, a little baby in the womb is not anything good or bad. Well then, could a little baby in the womb be a sinner? And the moment it's born into the world, be a sinner? No, sin is the breaking of the law. See? Sin is the breaking of the law. So, when we talk about inherited sin, it just goes against everything the Bible teaches. When Jesus wanted to show what adults should become like, what did he say? Verily become as little children, you shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. He didn't call some adult that had had his sins cleansed. He just called a little child up here. Then did he say, except you become like this little child here? Or what did he say? Except you become as little children. Did he mean little totally depraved sinners of the devil? No. So you can see, no. So inherited sin doesn't fit that. Now the Bible teaching about inherited sin, you want to write this down. You want to know this for certain. It'll answer every question that you've got. Ezekiel says, this is God speaking through Ezekiel, what mean ye that ye use this proverb concerning the land of Israel, saying, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. As I live, saith the Lord Jehovah, ye shall not have occasion any more to use this proverb in Israel. In other words, that's a bad proverb. Throw it away. It's not true. Behold, all souls are mine. As the soul of the Father, so also the soul of the Son. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. So now God straightens it out right now. Well, the Israelites were using this argument. You see, up here, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. So my son Dan, he goes out and he does some stupid thing, some sinful thing. You go to him and you say, Dan, why did you do that? He said, well, you don't know my dad, do you? It's because of my dad. It's because of my dad. My dad influence on me. My dad. So they used a proverb and they said, Dad eats sour grapes, and what happens to the kids' teeth? They're set on edge. The kids are affected by the dad. He said, not going to use that anymore. That's a bad proverb. He said, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. And so what God is saying there is, Dan, knock it off about Dad. Dad may be the biggest sinner in the whole world. If he is, he's going to die. That's spiritual death. But you are too. It's the soul that sinneth. Then he goes ahead and he says, yet say ye, wherefore doth not the Son bear the iniquity of the Father? Now doesn't the Son bear the iniquity of the Father? In however way you want to put it, whether it's Adam's inherited sin or whether it's any way you want to concoct it. It said, when the Son hath done that which is lawful and right, and hath kept all my statutes, and hath done them, he shall surely live. Doesn't make any difference what Dad does. If the Son does right, he will live. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The Son shall not bear the iniquity of the Father, neither shall the Father bear the iniquity of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. So this does away with any kind of inherited sin. Remember, sin is lawlessness. When you break the law, you become a sinner. It doesn't make any difference what anybody else does. Now, we get down here then to the power of one man. Just like one man brought the... So one man over here now is going to be able to take the sins away from the whole world we've got. So now, let's go back to the text. As we go back to the text, therefore, as through one man sin entered into the world, that's Adam, he brought sin into the world, and death through sin. Now, this death is both. He brought physical death because of sin. He brought spiritual death because of sin into the world. And so death passed into all men for that all sin. That is representatively through there. Now then, I want you to do something if you want to wait until another class to do this. But do it in your mind. As you start in verse 13, I've got a parenthesis. Verses 13 through 17 is a parenthetical statement. It is a parenthesis. How many of you have, like I do have here in mine, a dash? Do you have a dash before verse 13 that's there in yours? Or is there anything in there that indicates there's a break that's there? I do in mine in here. Now, here's what happened. What is a parenthetical statement? Because this is really important. This is really important to understand what he's talking about here. Now, what is a parenthetical statement? A parenthetical statement is where a person is making a statement about a subject, and he says something and causes his mind to want to add some additional thoughts that really doesn't pertain to this. Like, I'm getting ready to tell you now about this Shivro lady, about whether she should live or die. Now, Mrs. Shivro, now, watch me. This is a lady, by the way, that 20 years ago had an accident of some kind, and she went into a coma, and she has been blah, 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 and she's over there, she's down there in a nursing home, and she's blah, 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 and her husband says, pull the plug on her, and their father says, no, don't do this, and the parents are saying this and that, and bing, blah, 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 and so I give you a whole lot of information on her, and now, where did I start out? You remember where I started out? I was going to tell you whether she should live or die, right? See? I started out, now I'm going to talk about Mrs. Shiver, whether she should live or die. So now I come back. Now, I think that what they should do is, and then I go ahead with my statement and tell you what I think. So we do this all the time. When you're telling somebody, I say, one time there was a lady who told me, now she was my aunt, and she was the aunt on my dad's side. In fact, she was his youngest sister, and they were born out in the country and rode horses together. And she told me one time that I'd better not do a certain thing. Did I throw in a parenthetical statement in there? What could you do with all that information about she's my father's sister who rode horses? You can bypass it to get the real meaning. Now, you don't just throw passage away, though. You don't just throw parenthetical statement away, because the reason I told you that is because I think it's important enough for you to know it. See? But if you want to know the sentence, you've got to hold it off to the side. So here's what you've got to do. Verses 13 through 17 is a parenthesis. Paul does this over and over and over again in various epistles. And you just draw parentheses around it. And so you read verse 12, and then you immediately jump to verse 18, because that's where he picks up his study. That's where he picks up his subject. Now that's the way we're going to study it. We're going to study it that way. And then we're going to come back and we're going to take the parenthesis and put it in. We're not going to skip any verses. We're going to come back and do it. So now let's look at it this way. I'm just going to read, and then I'm going to go from 12 down to 18. Man sin entered into the world, and death through sin. And so death passed into all men, for that all sin. So then as through one trespass, the judgment, that's a condemnation, came unto all men to condemnation, even so through one act of righteousness, the free gift came unto all men to justification of life. For as through the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners, even so through the obedience of the one, that's Christ, shall the many be made righteous. And the law came in besides, that the trespass might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did abound more exceedingly. That as sin reigned in death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So now, we're going to start then in verse 18 down to see what he's talking about in this particular section in here then. So, and it says in verse 12, therefore, as through one man sin, that's through Adam, entered into the world, and death through sin. Adam is the one that introduced death, physical and spiritual. But let me say this again. In this context, he's not talking about physical death. That's not the thing he's talking about. He's talking about spiritual death. One thing that you can know, whatever Adam did, as he introduced it in, he introduced death. When Christ died, he undid it. So if it's talking about physical death, then what happens to physical death when Christ died? There's no more physical death since Christ died. No, it's not talking about physical death that's in here. So then through one trespass, the judgment came unto all men to condemnation. So Adam introduced sin, death, condemnation. Even so through the one act of righteousness, that's Christ, there, the free gift came unto all men. So Christ provided that free gift to justification of life. So now then, that's what he did for us. Over here, Adam brought death and condemnation. Over here, Jesus Christ is bringing justification of life. He's going to justify us, not condemn us. And he's going to give us life, not death. Well, what kind of life do we get through Jesus Christ? See? When you get into Christ so you can have a new life. See? It's spiritual life. So all the way through here, he's going to be talking about spiritual death, severance from God. Adam brought that. He introduced sin into the world. And as a result of him introducing sin into the world, all of us has caught the disease. And we've all sinned spiritually. Now, we're all going to die physically, but why are we going to die physically? Because we're removed from the tree of life. See? But now then, we die spiritually. And so whatever Adam did to us, Christ is going to undo. So next week, we'll pick up the text itself and start putting it together and running through there, and I'll check on what Mitch asked right there. Okay, class dismissed.